this last section, this last hour and 15 minutes or so, is really about what does the evidence suggest we should be more supportive, promote more with patients, so that again, it's not that we're going to eliminate their emotional reaction to stressors, but rather to minimize the chronicity of that distress or emotional arousal. Now, when we're looking at does a person's emotional reaction kind of dictate that maybe treatment, some counseling, something else might be sought, understand that in the field of primary care, one of the most common scales or questionnaires way to measure depression is the PHQ-9. It's basically the 9 symptoms, the criteria for depression. And the PHQ-2, are the 2 items that are most predictive of problems down the road. And so the question, our screener in our clinics anyway, is in the past 2 weeks, have you felt for several days little interest or pleasure in doing things, or for several days down, depressed, or hopeless? When it comes to anxiety, a very quick way to self-assess, this is the words that we use to kind of detect, are you perhaps hitting some threshold where some action might be warranted. In the past 2 weeks, have you felt for several days nervous, anxious, or on edge, or for several days not able to sleep or control worrying? Now, there's no such kind of common instrument yet that is used to assess stress generally or anger, hostility. But given my experience in scale construction, survey design, and in primary care, probably the best way to think of it is in the last 2 weeks, have you felt for several days irritable, cranky, or edgy, or quickly frustrated or critical? And so I think if the answer is yes to any of those questions, in our shops anyway, we would administer the full GAD-7 or PHQ-9 or a hostility questionnaire or a stress questionnaire and so forth. So really what's important is we're looking at assessing frequently, not being afraid of what we might find, so that we can take action, because action would be more efficient if we're dealing with less of an intense problem. Now let me start off with anxiety, which it turns out in the last year or two, anxiety has now outpaced depression as the #1 psychological complaint by primary care patients. Now, anxiety. Imagine you have lived your life according to your values, you feel like you follow the rules, been a good citizen, done all the right things. Unfortunately, you come to the end of your days, you go up to the pearly gates, and then you're told, no, that's not a sin either. My goodness, you must have worried yourself to death. That would be a bummer. There are so many things I could have done. So we're talking about emotional management. That is, understand that when we just show you words, we mention words that have negative connotations: murder, rape, torture, poverty, despair, suicide, those kinds of things, your amygdala tends to become activated. But if in fact you generally are more anxious, then we do the same thing, your amygdala responds even to a greater degree. So what we're trying to do again is, if a person is kind of primed for this, constantly on edge, we want to help them get separation between their stressors. Give them a rest between their ruminating thoughts, their anxieties and concerns. Now, one way I kind of think about this in terms of getting away from that barrier that, oh, I don't have enough time, is 20 minutes into 20 seconds. Now, what this refers to is the fact that I'm going to say something that I know is true because it's based on a lot of data, but I'm pretty sure you haven't heard before. Relaxation as a way to manage stress does not work. Thinking, what are you talking about? Relaxation? It lowers blood pressure, lowers cortisol. People can slow their heart rates down. Relaxation absolutely works. Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter whether it be progressive muscle relaxation, guided imagery and visualization, autogenic training, meditation techniques. How we have taught people to do that they can achieve those goals. But we also have data showing that the average person in this country over the last 30 years, regardless of the technique of relaxation, isn't doing any form of relaxation in less than 4 weeks. We have great efficacy data, but our effectiveness is lousy. Under controlled conditions, we can train you to slow down your heart rate, lower blood pressure. But do you practice it in your real lives? No. So the idea is, I mean, really, we tell people who've had 12, 14-hour stressful days, the remedy to that, wait till the end of the day. 9 o'clock at night, find a quiet, dark room, and then spend 20 minutes pretending you're in Tahiti. What? How about we actually offer them something that matches the stress they experience? That staircase, right? Up and up and up. How do you maximize 20 minutes into 20 seconds? Realize that the most common form of relaxation taught in this country is visualization. Apparently ignoring all the studies showing there's more than 1/3 of adult Americans who are not visually dominant. So what you want to do is go ahead and train them in relaxation, have them go to the beach or the mountains or wherever it might be that's relaxing. But have them in that process identify their dominant sensory modality. Now, if they're enjoying the blue of the cloud, the blue of the sky, the white of the clouds, the puffiness of the clouds, the green of the trees, the mountains on the horizon, if their focus is on shape and color, then they're probably visually dominant. But there's a lot of people who are maybe more olfactory dominant. That is, when they do relaxation, what they really get into is the odors, the smells, the scents of the pine trees, the salty, briny air as they get closer to the ocean. Other people still are more dominant when it comes to their auditory system. So what they really enjoy is the cawing of the birds off in the distance, the whistling of the wind as it goes through the trees, the trickling of the brook as it goes down the mountain meadow. Those are what they focus on. That's where they get the benefit from. Other people still are maybe more tactile, proprioceptive. They enjoy mainly the warmth of the sun against their skin, or the comforting heaviness as they lay back in the lounge chair or the hammock. So what you do is this. Have them identify in 2 or 3 words or so their dominant sensory modality. So it could be things like blue, puffy. The words don't have to make sense to anybody but that individual. They could be, whistling water. Okay? But identify their strength and then identify a few words to label that. Then merge that with the data showing that we have greater parasympathetic activation when we exhale than when we inhale. Okay? Now, diaphragmatic breath. 2 of those in 20 seconds. So it goes something like this, and there's different variations of this thing. Breathe in for about 3 seconds. But when you breathe in, one way to think of it is, imagine the initial air going in goes to the very bottom of the lungs and then gradually comes up, because we tend to not use our full lung capacity, only the top third or half. So the air goes in but starts at the bottom, fills up, 3 seconds. Hold it for 1. Then exhale for a good 4, maybe 5 seconds. But as you exhale with that parasympathetic dominance, what you also do is go to your sensory dominance or wheelhouse. Blue, puffy. Somebody else might do, whistling wind. Now, when do you actually do this? Well, not only when you're feeling stressed. Instead, pair it with something, pair this new habit with something that will happen frequently. Maybe 2 or 3 things together will happen 15 or 20 times a day. So, I don't know, many of us, when the phone rings, it's like we don't know who it is, what they're going to ask for us, are we going to be able to respond, is it going to be something we're going to like, not like, and all this uncertainty. Well, that can be somewhat stressful. Well, as long as you're not a 911 operator, let it ring. 3 times. Wow. And whistling wind, or whatever it might be. Again, that's my sensory strength, stronghouse. Now, could be, I don't know, every time you hit the send button on an email. Right now, well, not right now, in the next hour or so, you're all going to get probably into your car. I dare you. Can you afford 20 seconds? Sit in your car without starting the engine and take 2 diaphragmatic breaths and think, what are the most comforting words? What can my mantra be that can elicit that relaxation that I learned in 20-minute intervals? Okay? Could be, I don't know, every time that you open a new computer program on the computer. Could be, we often do with healthcare providers, we instruct them, look, right before you make a phone call, your next phone call to the next patient, or before you enter the exam room, before you do that, 20 seconds. After each meeting, you get up from a meeting, as soon as you get up, just stand there for 20 seconds, those kinds of things. Biofeedback is absolutely evidence-based medicine for the treatment of anxiety. And yet our best kind of numbers suggest that less than 14% of patients who would benefit have ever even heard of it. Folks, this has been around for 30-some years. This is not an intervention, it's just getting people to control their bodily reactions to anxiety. That control lowers anxiety, and you're directly lowering the physiologic impact of that anxiety. Now, CBT is not the only way to help a person better manage anxiety, but it tends to show up in the literature more often because it's very structured. You can kind of put it into a protocol or manual, and that kind of is very in synchrony with kind of the scientific paradigm. Now, you know, the metaphor we often use is that we're giving people tools to put in their toolbox. But in addition to that, we're also focusing on improving their distress tolerance. I don't know, the last couple of years, more than ever before, I'm seeing people who are anxious about being anxious. They're worried about worrying too much, right? And so, in fact, best example, Patty is a patient that I saw a while back, and I'll never forget, it was the 3rd session because it was pretty dramatic. She comes in, you can tell she's ticked. She says, I'm upset with what you said. I said, what did I say? Last session. She said, you told me part of my problem was that I was trying to solve my own problem. What the do you mean by that? A little aside, this woman had read more self-help books in 1 year than I've read in my lifetime. Right? She was so kind of adamant about not feeling anxious. I'm thinking, well, that's part of what's driving your anxiety. It's as if people develop this sense that I can't tolerate this feeling. So sometimes it's going to include conversations such as, Patty, tell me who you know who is like this, who never experiences anxiety. Isn't anxiety a good thing once in a while, kind of signaling that something might be wrong? So you're telling me that, I don't know, on a 10-point scale, you can't feel a level 4 anxiety for 10 minutes? That would be awful. You have some of those discussions because it's this fear that I can't tolerate the feeling that actually can exacerbate the problem. Now, if you have especially a person with generalized anxiety, what do we have available? Well, thought-stopping techniques and attention-grabbing tasks. This has historically been around the longest, plenty of evidence showing that it works. And it's based on a law in psychology we call mood congruent recall. Basically it says, whatever emotional state you're in now strongly dictates the kinds of thoughts you're going to have in the next several minutes at least. So if I'm depressed, it's actually easier for me to think of other reasons why I should be depressed than reasons why I should be angry or anxious. So with anxiety, if I'm anxious, the next, I don't know, several dozen thoughts are going to support, not contradict my anxiety. So I've got to stop that chain of thoughts. Now, there's multiple ways I can do that. I can kind of flip a rubber band on my wrist, could imagine a red stop sign, could, I don't know, think I'm pulling brakes on a locomotive filled with anxiety-arousing thoughts. I imagine clouds filled with anxiety and the winds change direction and they're blowing away. Any of those things will work generally for about 10 to 12 seconds. If you don't do anything else, there's a void there that will be filled with those anxiety thoughts knocking on the door. So it's attention-grabbing tasks that we then must turn to. Now, there's 2 or 3 elements of this attention-grabbing protocol that I think many mental health folks have either never been really introduced to, or they've kind of forgotten, perhaps, the importance of them, and it really kind of diminishes our effectiveness, I think. So to really drive home the point about how important this is, I want to share with you a story that happened to me several years ago. True story, that I was flying out of Washington, D.C. back to San Diego from a conference. And I fly a lot, so I know the first, 30 seconds, you're at a pretty steep angle of ascent as you're climbing. Well, it seemed a little longer than usual, so my anxiety started to escalate ever so slightly, and lo and behold, the pilot comes on the intercom. Now, I'm not used to a pilot coming on talking to us common folks in the cabin this early in the flight, so this already is now starting to alarm me, but he's talking really fast. He's going, "Thank you folks for flying American Airlines. Our flying time to San Diego will be 5 hours, 35 minutes. Our flying altitude will be 42,000 feet, blah, 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 blah." Oh, and by the way, he mentions, some of you may have noticed, we're having a little difficulty with the flaps. Yeah. He said, and verbatim, to this day, I will never forget what he says. "But don't you folks back there worry at all. We up here in the cockpit, we're going to fiddle with a few switches and get back to you." Fiddle with a few... What's my automatic thought? I'm going to die, right? Now, right behind "I'm going to die" is always an idiosyncratic chain of thoughts, and shall I say, I'm a little more quantitatively oriented than most. So I start calculating out how long I have to live. So I started assuming about a 35-degree angle of ascent, 350 miles an hour. I think there's like 100 miles of atmosphere. Because if he doesn't fix the flaps, we're flying right out of the atmosphere, for sure. And when that happens, you're going to run out of oxygen. And so I've been told when you run out of oxygen, you start getting kind of numbness and tingling in your fingers and toes and dizzy and woozy. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's happening already. Time out. That's my thought-stopping thought, is time out. Now, because I obviously wasn't prepared for this, what do I have as an attention-grabbing task? The in-flight magazine. So I pull out that magazine, and I'm looking through this magazine, and I'm just totally thrilled to be reading about Brad and Angelina for the 97th time. After about 30 seconds, this is important, this is one of the skills, a metacognitive skill, is I realize that more than half my thoughts have nothing to do with Brad and Angelina. They're thinking about my impending death. Right? So I put that down, and I pull out a crossword puzzle. Now, my guess is probably 7 or 8 minutes into this crossword puzzle, again, I hit my threshold, which is 50%, saying that that's not grabbing my attention well enough, because half my thoughts are not about 16 across, they're about my painful demise. I put that down, and I pull out a book. Now, my nose is in this book for a few minutes anyway, and by now we've actually leveled off, and the pilot comes back on, and he says, "Folks," getting back to that little flap problem we were having back there, and he said, "We got some good news, we got some bad news too." He says, "The bad news is that we don't feel totally comfortable flying this plane anymore." Now, okay, I'm anxious, but I swear there was a pregnant pause there. When he finishes the sentence, "We don't feel totally comfortable flying this plane anymore all the way to San Diego. So we're going to turn around and head back to the DC area." He said, "That's going to mess up all your travel plans. This is a late afternoon takeoff. Not very likely you're getting back to the West Coast tonight. We'll put you up in a hotel, give you a food voucher, and so forth." Fortunately, to balance that bad news, we have some good news, he says. Rather than land back at Ronald Reagan Airport from where we took off, we've been cleared to land in Dulles because they have a longer runway. what's my first thought? I'm going to die. I've never needed a longer runway before, right? So, that book goes right against my nose. I start trying to use that as an attention-grabbing task. That wears out after a while, and what do? I put that down and I pull out my calendar because I've got plenty of meetings and all kinds of stuff to plan as a result of this conference. Now we're about to land, we're about a mile or two out, about 500 feet in the air, and I have a window seat because at that point in time I always wanted to see what was going on. Well, I look out my window and it's daylight, but what do? I count 11 emergency vehicles with their lights flashing. We know why their lights are flashing, because that allows them to more quickly scrape off the dead bodies, self-determined. My first thought, I'm going to die, right? 30 seconds later, we're fine. Drives home a couple points. One, patients should never be left to assume that this approach gets rid of their automatic thoughts. That is really almost not even possible, right? Don't waste our time doing this. Focus on separation, getting them to kind of recover, if you will. Second thing is, I've burned through what? In that 30, 35 minutes, probably 5 or 6 different attention-grabbing tasks. But when you ask people, have you tried this before? Oh yeah, that didn't work. They'll often end up telling you that they were trying to have one attention-grabbing task be the total answer for their anxiety. And that's not the case. It's not a sign of failure, it's part of the process. So I think that kind of making sure that our patients have the proper expectations of this protocol is pretty important in improving our effectiveness. The worry box and compartmentalizing. Here, as a psychologist, and what work I've done, I will tell you that in a few minutes I'll tell you what I think the king of all coping skills is, but the queen of coping skills is compartmentalization. That is being able to put boundaries around how we worry and address our anxieties and concerns. Because a worry box is just a very concrete example of compartmentalization, literally. Now, when we ask patients who, especially with generalized anxiety disorder, is there anything that you think is a reason to keep things the way they are? Because you're ruminating a lot. You're thinking about all these different things all the time. They will often tell you, well, at least I won't be surprised or caught off guard because I'm, quote, always thinking and always prepared. Well, it's usually a pretty heavy price they're paying, right? And again, it goes back to the fundamental belief that if something happens, I won't be equipped to respond adequately. So I better always be on edge, always thinking about stuff. So what we have them do is write down their worries on paper. This seems way too simple to work, but it does. Have them write their worries on paper, one at a time. And so they worry about the same things we worry about. Maybe it's a job interview on Friday. Okay, job interview on Friday. Write that on a piece of paper. But critical, underneath it, write, because we both agree, don't we, that thinking about it all the time is not helpful. What would be a better time to worry or think about it? Friday's interview. How about Thursday, 7 p.m.? Cool. Thursday, 7 p.m. Fold it up, put it in the box, your worry box, your desk drawer, the corner of the desk, whatever. Next worry could be taxes. Okay, taxes. Put that down. Better time to worry about it? Saturday, 10 a.m. Saturday, 10 a.m. Fold up. You can have dozens of these pieces of paper in your worry box. Okay? 2 big reasons why the peer-reviewed literature hands down says this is amazingly effective. One is because they will have those worries again, guaranteed. But now this time, rather than saying, oh, I'm glad it's still up there so I don't forget, they can say, silly me, I won't forget, I've actually written it down. And I'll deal with it at Thursday at 7 p.m. Second reason why it's so effective, no one in their right mind on Thursday at 7 p.m. is going to simply sit there and worry about it. They're more likely to take action. Now, here's another phrase that has been incredibly helpful to the people that I've helped, that I see in clinic. Action trumps anxiety. Action trumps anxiety. Getting people action-oriented problem solving even if it's not effective, they start thinking to themselves, shoot, I thought that would have worked better. I wonder, oh, you know what? This is one thing I didn't anticipate. Well, let me kind of do a workaround, and how can I make this work better next time? What are they in? They're in problem-solving mode and not in this emotional vortex frozen by anxiety. There's a lot of scheduling and problem-solving, things you and I might take for granted, but I think we can also empathize with the fact that when our stress is high, our problem-solving skills are not really at their best. And so, it also includes a lot of addressing this cognitive distorted thinking, these patterns that, initially might seem like they're shortcuts, they save us time and energy, but they can lead us down really bad paths. That is, they can become irrational or so exaggerated that they actually kind of do us damage. A lot of the stress we experience is based on what our initial expectations are and whether they're met or not. Calvin demonstrates what happens when they're not met. He says to his teacher, Miss Wormwood, I protest a C grade at saying I did only an average job and I got 75% of the answers correct. In today's society, doing something 75% right is outstanding. If government and industry were 75% competent, we'd be ecstatic. I won't stand for this artificial standard of performance. I demand an A for this kind of work. We can only guess what the teacher does when he says, oh, I think it's really gross how she drinks Maalox straight from the bottle. Right? It's these people who actually give us ulcers.